So we come to this feast of Saint Joseph, and in some ways, I think Saint Joseph is raised up for us as an example of what it means to be a steward of God's blessings. And to be a steward of God's blessings in some ways means that we're given a gift that we're to hold in trust for others. That's what I think that's the charism of Saint Joseph, that he is given a gift for the whole world, for all people in all times and places. And he is called to steward that gift and see it safely to fruition. And Matthew's gospel really brings out the role that Joseph plays in through his obedience to God's call, through his obedience to God's command, which in a sense transcends human prudence. The Joseph starts out being, a righteous man, being someone who, in the Semitic expression, he's someone who follows through with his end of the bargain, right? And so that Joseph, being the kind of guy who follows through on his word, he tries to spare Mary from public disgrace and he follows a path of mercy, and that's how Joseph interprets his agreement with Mary. And this is, I just want to highlight this in a sense that it could, again, from the human point of view, Joseph could point out where Mary, from his perspective, Mary had broken faith with him, that Mary had not been righteous with him, and therefore he was under no obligation to be merciful to her. But Joseph is lifted up, in a sense, as an example of how God's mercy works, because in a sense that from, Joseph, instead of pointing a finger at Mary and how she has broken faith with him, he takes responsibility for his own mercy and actions, right? In a sense, he says, you know what, no matter what anybody else does, I'm going to follow through on my agreement, in a sense. And his agreement to Mary is to, in a sense, be a covering for her, to be the husband, right? That from Joseph's perspective, before God kind of lets Joseph in on the plan, that he will protect Mary as her husband and see her safely to, in a sense, he's willing to save Mary from a public execution, which if he insisted on his rights, he could have seen to have happened. But again, instead of pointing a finger at how others broke their covenant with him, Joseph fulfills his covenant. In fact, he goes over above and beyond his kind of agreement, the bargain he made. And that's what makes Joseph righteous. In a sense, that's what makes him the kind of material that God likes to work with. And because that's how God sees us, right? In a sense, we have broken our covenant with God. We have not been faithful to our end of the bargain, but God, as our Father, will be faithful to us. And so through the power of the Holy Spirit, just as the power of the Holy Spirit is working through Mary to bring about a mighty act of deliverance and salvation, so God's Holy Spirit is working in us to bring about a mighty work of deliverance and salvation. In a sense, Joseph mirrors, in his relationship with Mary, he mirrors God's relationship to humanity. God will be faithful to us even when we have not been faithful to him. And in the acting of mercy, following the path of mercy, Joseph puts himself in a position to be surprised by grace, to be surprised by the new thing that God is doing in the world. And so when we act with forgiveness and mercy and hesed, steadfast love, right? When we walk in that way of love, we put ourselves in the position of being capable of surprise, being capable of witnessing a new thing, a new creation breaking out right in front of us. And so then we can be called to be a steward of that new creation and bring it forth into the lives of others. Joseph was someone who shows us what it means in a very, very personal way Couldn't get more personal than the way Joseph is called to be righteous, is called to be merciful, is called to show steadfast love. Undeservedly, again, from his perspective, undeservedly to Mary. But again, when we are able to walk in that way, God is able to open our eyes to the extraordinary things he is doing to make all things new, including righteous people like Joseph, and we hope like you and me. A reading from St. Matthew's Gospel. Now, the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to dismiss her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." All this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel," which means, God is with us. When Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took her as his wife, but had no marital relations with her until she had borne a son, and he named him Jesus. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.